Brokering success demands a battle-ready strategy. TIE TMS equips brokers with the ultimate battle station for conquering a tough market. With TIE, brokers gain access to a comprehensive platform where rate intelligence and quote history coverage on a single screen. Revolutionize the way your brokers perform by giving them a competitive advantage with TIE TMS. For more info, visit tiesoftware.com/battlestation. Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Today we are covering all things kind of international e-commerce. Don't forget to subscribe to Check Call, the newsletter, on FreightWaves.com if you haven't already. Today we welcome Nick Bartlett, Director at CBIP Logistics. Thanks for joining us today, Nick.
Thanks for having me, Mary. Good to be here.
I am very excited about today because we're kind of diving into, the world behind e-commerce. It's something that's very popular and it's only going to continue to grow. But also there's a lot of places that don't necessarily have a good e-commerce or final mile plan in place. So I'm kind of excited that today we get to dive into that and see kind of how you guys have perfected it. But before we get too far into that, let's get started on you. And got some background on you and how you got started at CBIP.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's always nice to join these shows, and obviously a big fan of the FreightWaves podcast as well. In terms of my story, pretty simple, really. I'm a Kiwi from a small country in the South Pacific, born and raised in New Zealand, and sort of just kind of worked my way through, all of the yards that you have to do in the early days of high school and university and working and all of that good stuff. And sort of in my late, sort of mid to late 20s, I thought it would be a good idea to pack up my bags and move to Asia, really with no real plan, apart from, a bit of OE sort of ambition, which is, to be honest, as a New Zealander, because we're so far away from the rest of the world, one of our kind of paths of, sort of one of the passages of life, if you like, is to kind of go spend time overseas. My parents had, my sisters had, my brother had, so it was kind of like, Nick, where are you going to go? And I was like, you know what, I'm going to go to Hong Kong. And everyone thought I was a little bit mad, but, I always had a real soft spot for the East, for the Asian markets and the people, the culture, and really kind of progressed my corporate career and started my corporate career in Shell, the oil company, doing a range of different jobs with them, and then kind of managed to get myself some employment out of their Hong Kong office. And then from there, I was sort of in quite a specific role that had quite a big exposure to the retail sector, as well as to the supply chain side of retail. And sort of through that, I kind of started to realize that there was a few other things that I was quite interested in, particularly around what I was seeing in terms of the growth of e-commerce out of Asia in particular. And so, fast forward, kind of realizing the corporate dream kind of wasn't for me, and then deciding that actually, maybe I couldn't actually get another job. And this is kind of the funny part, is I tried to get another job with, insurance companies, banks, you name it, I tried it. And everyone was like, "Nah, you're too niche. So I was like, you know what? If I can't get a job, I'll just hire myself. And that was really the start of CBIP Logistics, was off the back of kind of realizing that there was a huge amount of opportunity with the emergence of e-commerce. This is going back to 2015. We opened the business in 2015, and at those time, there was, the marketplaces were still very small. There weren't a huge amount of merchants coming out of the East selling internationally. It was growing, but it certainly wasn't anywhere near what it is today. And we just sort of saw that there was a big gap between what the traditional industry was offering, the DHLs and the DSVs and the big boys across traditional logistics, versus what e-commerce logistics demands. And it's a really, really different proposition. And what we saw was that there was a gap in the Asian markets where we could have an influence on connecting brands with far superior direct-to-consumer logistics options. And from there, we just sort of grew. And fast forward 8 years later, here I am on a podcast with Mary O'Connell from FreightWaves. So, life takes us some funny directions, and a couple of kids along the way, and all of a sudden, you sort of, your perspective shifts, and you can't quite believe you were once the man or the boy that you were, 5, 10, 15 years ago. So, just enjoying the journey, most importantly.
I like that. I like that on an international level. Because I always joke, like, once you're in logistics, you can't get out of it no matter how hard you try. So I like that even on an international level, that still stands because I tried to leave twice and here we are.
Yeah, yeah. And the funny thing is, I think as the business has grown and we've added more people and we've added more countries and we've got a bigger customer base, and you sort of think, oh, maybe I'll be able to get out of certain aspects of it. There'll be certain aspects I can kind of, maybe be less involved with, but even that's not the case as well. So, as the director and the one of the owners of the business, I'm still very much actively involved in every facet of the business, even the bits that we all don't love sometimes as well. Which is, let's be honest, logistics can be. I'm a commercial guy. I'm a sales. I'm a commercial. I'm a marketeer guy. I'm not a heavy ops guy, but certainly you've learned the hard way over the last 10 years of what kind of getting stuck in really means, particularly if you're going to make your own business grow and be meaningful for the customers that we support.
I absolutely love that. But kind of jumping into, the logistics part that won't let go of you. You guys really do have that specialized e-commerce approach, and you've really kind of ironed out, what it means to be successful in that space. Do you mind just kind of breaking down kind of what you guys have done, so that way, it looks seamless when the customer clicks and here it goes, everything magically shows up at their door. But we all know it's not that magical.
Yeah, it's kind of like I think one of my strengths maybe is sometimes I'm a little bit too honest, and sometimes I think that honesty can kind of play through what is often deemed as a massive facade. But you know what? Every industry has this, but certainly there are aspects of what we do that are massively fragmented. But to take a step back, we're a really unconventional logistics company. And when I say that, I mean, our industry is full of very traditional providers. It is a very fragmented and traditional market, logistics, and once upon a time, it's been developed over time of moving bulk freight from one place to another place, and ocean freight, carry container ships and big air freight movements and big truck movements, and that market has just completely been flipped on its head with direct to consumer. So you've kind of tried to fit a square into a round hole sort of thing within the industry. You've tried to use the asset base to deliver a service that is really not designed. That asset base is not actually designed well enough to service the needs of a direct to consumer customer. So as an unconventional provider, we call ourselves a 4PL, but whatever language you might want to use, a 4PL is much more diagnostic orientation as a logistics provider. So it means that we actually design and build our logistics solutions for the brands that we work with. And so that means that we're much more interested in delivering and working out a way to deliver the brand's promise in their logistics rather than focusing on what the products that we have to sell as a provider. Now, if you look at the traditional side of the market, you look at big contract logistics companies. They have a big warehouse, and their job is to fill the warehouse as within a standardized format as much as they can, right? Very much our business model is the opposite of that. It's kind of like, hey, tell us what it is that you need. Let's really diagnose what's going well, where the improvement opportunities are, and then let's design and let's execute a logistics program using all of our different various suppliers that we work with across our network, and that's around 100 plus different suppliers. And those suppliers are everything from warehouses to clearing agents to freight forwarders to local delivery companies to international delivery agents as well. So, our whole model really is around sort of being best practice for the brand, helping the brand deliver on its promises, and then building a program of work around that. And it's certainly not a conventional offer. And it's certainly not one that is massively scalable at having hundreds of thousands of customers like a aggregate technology might do. But certainly we've proven that we can create a huge amount of value, and our business model can scale when we get good efficiency through the network that we've got. So certainly a slightly different perspective on how we can service direct to consumer brands with their ongoing logistics needs.
I like that you guys really kind of come in with the solution, and also the scalable aspect, because a lot of the e-commerce brands, I mean, aside from the big Fortune 500 e-commerce brands, a lot of them, start out as maybe out of a garage, out of a storage unit, out of a very small facility. And that's the problem when they start to try to grow. There's not always a lot of space for those, like, I'm not small, but I'm not big. There's not always a lot of resources for those kind of mid-tier e-commerce companies. But I kind of like that you guys are like, we got it. Don't worry about it. Don't stress yourself out. We're here for you.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think one of the things we try and do is we try and, again, like, I'm really conscious of kind of what sounds cliche versus what's real, but we do really try and collaborate and be an extension of those pros. Like, our ideal customers, somewhere between $5 and $100 million a year in revenue, right? Like, that's kind of the sweet spot where we know that our model makes a difference, and that's often because the brands are working on relatively lean teams and they're looking for someone that can centralize and bring in a whole bunch of vendors, bring in a whole bunch of options for them to consider that will improve the way that they do things right now. And that certainly is where it creates a lot of value. And that extension of the team, our account management function really is more like, to be honest, it may as well be called, an outsourced in-house team. Really, because our account managers are so ingrained in people in our customers' operations, way, way more so than what a normal relationship would look like. And that's good and bad, right? Because when it's good, the going's good, but when it's bad, you're all in the trenches together and you're trying to figure stuff out together. And everyone knows that logistics is stressful, and shots can get fired and people get frustrated, and all of those things. So you kind of got to learn to manage that balance as effectively as you can.
Yeah, that is the ultimate balance that anyone has of I feel like that's just logistics. When the good days are good, they're really good. And when the bad days are bad, and nobody really quite has bad days like those in freight.
Yeah, maybe that's what keeps us coming back, Mary. Maybe it's like it's like a bad drug, You just every now and then you get a hit, and you're like, oh, that was a good day, Like we just finished a job just recently for an American customer, and doing a big dropship job out of China for them, and it went so well. And big dropship jobs don't often go that well because there's always issues with returns, failed deliveries, damages, missed addresses, mispacking, whatever it might be. There's always that 1, 2, 3% where you have challenges, and this was just like, whoa, I think we did like 10,000 orders in 2 days, and it was like there are moments where it all just clicks and works really, really well.
Yeah, and I think it is. I think that, like, a drug is the best description of it, because those highs, man, they are good. And like when you have a good day, oh man, nothing can take you down. But like you were saying, so you guys just did this big drop ship program for a U.S. customer, but you guys are international. So how do you guys handle? Because last mile is tricky enough in one country. How do you guys do it in multiple without actually going crazy and losing your mind?
Yeah, so look, I guess, if you strip it right back, like, fundamentally our job is to partner with the most common, but also less common and well-known providers in every market that we operate in, right? So right now we're operating in 15 jurisdictions globally, so 15 different markets. It's like Europe, North America, Canada, Asia Pacific primarily. And across those markets, of course, there is a huge amount of variation in the carrier contracts and the carrier pricing and the relationship status that we have with these respective carriers. But fundamentally, that is our job as a business, is to aggregate and work with as many different providers as we can. So when customers come to us, our value is much more easily created, because we can say, oh, hey, okay, Mary, you've got a brand, you want to expand into the UK, here are 4 carriers that we work with. You want to expand into Europe, here's 3 carriers that we work with, for example, is kind of the power of the model that we have, right? So instead of Mary having to go and talk with 7 companies, to have 7 pricing conversations, to have 7 different contracts reviewed, to have 7 different proposals sent to her, we are effectively consolidating that and then dumbing that right down to say, this is what this provider can prevail for you, and this is where the benefits are for this particular provider. So, as our business, it's kind of our core to deliver that value for our customers. But on the flip side, if I was a brand, and how do I do it? Look, to be honest, it's really, really hard. And it's hard for a few reasons, because one, quite often the hardest reason is not so much that it's not hard to get hold of another courier, another last mile delivery provider in a foreign market. Let's say you're American and you want to move to Australia with your business. There are like 35 courier companies that you could call just tomorrow, right? But the problem is you need an Australian ABN number to get a registered account. You need to have local bank accounts set up in order to pay local providers, for example. There's a whole bunch of sort of other underlying business aspects that come into your ability to actually trade with these particular providers. So that's one really big hindrance for brands, is like, hey, actually it's easy to find them, but it's actually hard to actually set up accounts and get going. The other one is that it's very difficult to build any synergy across multiple markets with the same carrier, which sounds crazy, right? Like if Mary O'Connell had a trucking company in 4 countries, you would think that you could go to Mary O'Connell head office and say, hey, I'm in 4 countries with you. I need a price that represents my volume across 4 markets, right? As common sense as that may sound, unfortunately, that's not the case. You knock on DHL's door and they will say to you in Thailand, yep, we can give you a price for $1. And then in Hong Kong, they'll say your price is $4. And then you're like, what's going on here? We're doing the exact same things, the exact same lanes, the exact same volumes, but it's different people. And it's not a criticism to those guys. It's just a reality of dealing with a big multinational provider like that. Whereas for us, we hold both those global accounts with those big carriers, we hold the regional with the regional carriers, and then we hold the local. We've got a provider in Vietnam, for example, called Nuances Logistics. Number 3 or 4 in the market, local delivery agent provider. Outstanding, like cost-effective, good performer, really good example of someone that was looking to get into Vietnam that would never, ever have been able to probably establish a relationship with that type of carrier. But through our model and through the network, they're able to do that. So that's where I guess our model helps. But also on the flip side, if you are a brand trying to do it yourself, it is hard. But what I would say is it is achievable. But I think, like you said before, it depends on what level in the business that you kind of are at, and how much leverage and scale and efficiency can you offer to those different carriers. But certainly, if I was a business listening to this, thinking about, hey, how could I look to expand, I'd certainly be looking to leverage someone like a 4PL or someone that can provide you with access. And that access really is the key thing there, to understand what your options are.
I also really like that part because, like you mentioned, like when you leverage a 3PL, 4PL, excuse me, when you leverage someone that is their expertise and that is something that they have, a background in, they have that power in, to be able to leverage them is only going to elevate your business, because it's something that we've said a bunch of times on the show of, if you make really good muffins, you don't need to sit there trying to negotiate pricing contracts with a carrier in another country, because that's not your core business. Like, it's going to affect the quality of your muffins because you're taking that manpower and everything away.
And that's exactly what happens.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I don't know why I always use muffins as the example, but it makes sense. Like, it's not like, stick with what you know. And the same way that you're an expert in making muffins, go to the person that's the expert in getting things where they need to be, because otherwise you've lost the plot and it's just going to be a lot more headache and possibly a not as profitable venture.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that people really underestimate is they underestimate not only how much time it takes, but how much knowledge you have to build to be effective in these foreign markets, right? Like if you are an American brand looking to get out into a foreign, Western market, like the amount of stuff you've got to know. So, partnering with someone that can open you up to all of these things around the different various aspects you might need to be able to trade in the European Union or to trade in the UK. Well, what does it actually look like? What is that checklist of things that you've got to do beyond just logistics? But logistics itself, I think of all of the facets of a direct-to-consumer brand. I feel like logistics is the one that it's the most critical, and often it's the most misunderstood, and it's often the least resourced compared to, marketing, product, manufacturing, quality, influencer, all this other stuff, which is it's the kind of I used to work for a guy who mentored me, and he called it, all the coloring books, all the colors and rainbows, like the marketing and sales and the product department, and then it's all the guys in the sandpit, with sand everywhere that no one really wants to go and hang out with, because they're the ones that are really making it click. So it's kind of it's really true, right? Like, it's like, if it's not cool and sexy, you're probably not going to spend as much time there. But if it's cool and sexy, you're going to spend lots of time there, and then I totally understand that. But I think that's where, like, our business actually creates a lot of value, because we can kind of get excited and make it a bit more fun and sexy for you.
So we are running out of time, but before I get to the question of the day, what is your biggest piece of advice for a shipper looking to kind of improve their operations and maybe expand internationally? What's the biggest piece of advice that you can give them?
So look, there's so many things, but I think that the first one is for brands to really understand their P&L, and I know that might seem like a really obvious one, but when you start trading in a different market, with a different currency, with a different transport cost, with a different retail price, you really have to make sure that you really, really understand your P&L, and right down to the level of at the SKU level. Some of the biggest surprises come from the smallest details. And we've seen a number of brands that simply have had great ambition, great products, try and expand internationally, but they've just gone way too early. They've either gone with no demand, no research, no business case, and they've just flung themselves into it thinking, oh, we've had a few inquiries down here, so we'll just do it. And again, this kind of goes back to the whole, how much knowledge do you have of logistics? How well do you know the markets, and how well resourced are you? So really, really understanding your financials, and what are your financials telling you in terms of the sort of the profitability or the opportunity cost of expanding. That would be sort of my number one thing. Number two would be just be really realistic about what your ambitions for global expansion are, and make sure you resource it accordingly. Don't sort of just go into it thinking this is going to be a piece of cake. Australia, they speak English, and it should be fine. We'll just roll up and get a few carriers and a few partners, and she'll be, like the Australians say, she'll be right. It's like a saying they say, she'll be right. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but she'll be right. It's kind of like it'll be an all good attitude, and sometimes that is the case, and sometimes it is okay. But more often enough, brands get caught up with huge amount of overcharges. They get caught up with unexpected expenses. They get caught up with having too much inventory dropped into the market that they're not selling. They get caught up with just completely misreading the popularity of the product or the season, perhaps, as well. So there are a couple of ones. I guess another one would be around really understanding your weaknesses as a business, and really try and spend time to address those weaknesses. I think having self-awareness of one's own weaknesses is obviously critical, but as a business, to be aware of the weaknesses of the business, and really try and consciously look after them. Like, if you're in a relationship with someone and they tell you to stop doing something, like, you really try and stop doing something. If someone says, hey, can you really stop doing that? It's like, okay, cool, I'll consciously try, right? So I think a big chunk of it is about understanding those weaknesses, and fundamentally trying to make a difference, and trying to make those small changes. I'd be looking at sort of the operational, the technology side of your business, and do you have the right tech stack that supports the expansion? So what I mean by that is, like, how much consideration have you given to your systems and the technology you're using to enable you to actually be able to sell offshore, be able to grow into a new market. One of the most common things that people don't understand is, like, Shopify has a limitation, as an example, that you can't pay into multiple currency accounts other than your primary currency unless you have more than one storefront. And so people then have to have a whole nother Shopify package, and it can kind of have quite a big commercial impact on the viability of setting up a store, because it's another P&L, it's another storefront to manage, it's another whole suite of tasks that you have to do in order to satisfy that requirement, unless you just pay Shopify more money again to get an extensive package. So it's kind of it's about understanding kind of what technology are you going to need to be able to set yourself up, and what have you got right now, and where are the gaps perhaps on that. And then probably the last one is just around finding the right partners, right? And it's not always easy to find partners because you don't really know. And like every good first Tinder date, I guess most of it probably goes well, and then the second and the third and the fourth start not going so well, and that's when you stop dating each other, right? So I always think about these relationships with new customers as we have to prove ourselves, not just on the first call, the second call, the fifth call, but we need to constantly proving ourselves to these guys that we are the right choice. Both from the supplier side doing that, but also from the customer side doing that too, right? Quite often enough, we don't see enough brands taking responsibility for their own choices rather than just kind of finding a way to point it at someone else as well when things don't go right. So, having really transparent, collaborative, open discussions with partners is critical. But also finding partners in a market that you're not familiar with that do give you some trust, some validity, and some comfort that they can genuinely help you is obviously really important. So that'd be my sort of 5-6 top tips if you're considering to expand internationally. And obviously we're here if you want to have a chat.
I absolutely love that because that's something that, I've seen someone try to import something or send something out and they've got this great deal, but because even something down to something so silly as like a line on a paperwork is for a customs or import or whatever is done wrong, suddenly they've lost any profit they would have made and they're in the hole before the stuff even gets to the like where it needs to actually be. And so that's where it's like, especially if it's something you're not familiar with, or if it's any sort of international customs, whatever, like 100% go to that expert, even if they cost a little bit more, because you could potentially end up paying more for just something as silly as like putting something in on the wrong line or not fully explaining out what a product is.
Totally agree. And you know what? When you start on the back foot, the rest of it just goes down a really fast, steep hill. It really does. And it's sad, right? It's really sad, but it's what happens because brands get put under pressure. They're under cash flow pressure. They're under pressure for making the wrong call. And then all of a sudden, as a supplier, you're just sitting there going, well, this is we can kind of see the writing on the wall already here. So doing your due diligence, doing your homework and finding the right people is absolutely key.
So speaking of going downhill, let's go downhill. And there is a question that everyone comes on the show has to answer. Nick, you are not an exception today. You really aren't. So we got to know once and for all, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Absolutely not.
Yes, I am a firm absolutely not.
Yeah, it's absolutely it's a hot dog. It's got its own identity. Why are we trying to bunch it in having a different identity? It's silly.
I mean, the internet did, if we're being honest. It's not, I did not come up with it because I don't believe that a hot dog is a sandwich.
What's the percentages on the score of that question? Like, what's the percentages of yeses and nos?
Honestly, it's pretty split. It's pretty split. We got some people coming and saying it's a taco, which is just hurts your brain. But yeah, honestly, it's pretty split. I'm thinking we're gonna need to have a recap episode of it, of just figuring out where everybody has landed. But that being said, since we are out of time today, if anyone wants to reach out about, the origins of hot dog as a sandwich or any sort of e-commerce hiccups or any questions they have, where can they find you outside the show?
We're available at CBIPLogistics.com, so nice and easy. That's CBIP and then logistics, all in one word.com. Or you can find me on LinkedIn at Nick Bartlett. Hong Kong is my location in case you are seeking a filter if you find too many Nick Bartletts. And then I'm also on Twitter, Nick_Bartlett, CBIP. At Twitter as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, Mary.
Find Check Call the Podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Don't forget to check out all the other incredible FreightWaves shows, and I'll see you on the internet.